The idea for this program had its beginnings for me from 2010 to 2018, that 8-year period. Doug Zook, radio personality for WHBU Radio. He had different shows during that period, and I was a guest on his shows often. In fact, I think I figured it up the other day, we did 150 radio shows together. And we would just talk history. Doug was a big history buff, and of course I am, and so we would just talk history and share stories and so forth. But invariably, he would say to me, he'd have a name written down somewhere, and he'd say, where was such and such? Or how did such and such get its name? He was doing that to stump me. He was successful a lot of the time. Some I knew, but we also realized that while we were doing this show and having this discussion about where was Toad Level and where was Wrinkle and where was Buzzard's Roost and some of the other choice names that our predecessors named communities around here, we'd get callers that would call in, and I realized there was a lot of interest in this. And so I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put together a list of all the names that were, I call them place names in Madison County. Here in our files, people had done that before me, and the lists were nice lists. They were rather incomplete, but they were the effort that the folks made. I put all those together, and then I decided, well, there's got to be more than that. So I began to look through the county histories. I began to look through the old newspapers. I began to look through pamphlets, church directories, anything I could get my hands on that would reveal place names in our county. And when I was all done, I came up with 148 place names in this county. Now, a place name can be Anderson, that's one. It can be Toad Level. It can be Broomcorn Row. That's an interesting story. You'll have to come back for that one. 148 of them. And when I did that, I thought, you know, that's really the history of our county. When you get right down to it, is all of these little places that were here at one time. Many of them are gone, but number of them still are here. And so I began to put them into the townships. And when I did that, I realized, well, you know, maybe a program about those townships would be in order. And that kind of went along with something else that was in the back of my mind. 4 years from now, in 2023, this county will be 200 years old. And I'm sure there'll be a big doings. There was in 1973 for the sesquicentennial. If you can believe it, it was in the paper. If you can believe it, the crowd estimated at the main event in downtown Anderson for the sesquicentennial observation, they had a parade and so forth. Now listen to this, 125,000. I find that hard to believe. I don't know how you could stick 125,000 people down here, but that was the estimation of the crowd size. I think probably it was a 12-day event, so that might have been the attendance spread out over 12 days, but the way the paper portrayed it, it was a one-day event where they got 125,000. Be that as it may, it was a big deal. And so I'm sure that 4 years from now, it'll be another big deal because we'll be 200 years old. And I thought, well, as county historian, maybe I should begin to prepare the county residents for some understanding of their history so that they can get more fun and appreciation out of the bicentennial. So you now have the building blocks for what you're going to see today. It started with the conversations that Doug Zook and I had over these odd name places, and it evolved into a series that I wrote for the Herald Bulletin. And incidentally, I can say this, the Herald Bulletin has come to me and they said, we want to do a second book and it will be on this subject, and it will be what's in a name, and it's due out Thanksgiving. And again, the Historical Society will benefit from that, so watch the papers for that information. Having said all that, yeah, thank you, Gil. Let's see if does that help or not?
Just leave it alone.
Leave it like that? Okay. All right. Now that's not a license to go to sleep. Having said all that, the series is What's in a Name? And today is Adams Township. Throughout parts 1 and 2 of this Adams Township installments of this series will be references to the New Columbus Road. In Anderson Township, it's known as Columbus Avenue. Once it crosses into Adams Township at County Road 400 South, Columbus Avenue becomes the New Columbus Road until it reaches US 36. Beyond there, the same road then becomes Madison County Road 100 East. And a number of years ago, a portion of that same road was Indiana State Road 109 before it was rerouted. One additional explanation is necessary. County Road 500 South is also known to area locals as the Alliance Road. Adams Township forms the southeast corner of Madison County and is 35 square miles, being 5 miles east to west and 7 miles north to south. It was one of the first 5 townships formed in Madison County sometime between 1823 and 1829 and was named for Abraham Adams, who was the first white man to settle within its borders. Now I need to explain something to you. When I say that it was formed sometime between 1823 and 1829, we don't know. We do not know the formation date of Fall Creek, Adams, Anderson, Greene, and Jackson townships. Those 5 townships are the first 5. And I know from records that I found of a county commissioners meeting in January of 1829, it mentions those 5 townships. So I know they were formed. But I don't know when they were formed, and I don't know what order they were formed in. So I'm putting this presentation on in the order that I think that it was formed, and I believe Adams was second. I think Fall Creek would have been first, and I think Adams is second. And I'll talk more about the rest of the townships here in a little bit to give you some news about something up and coming for you. A 1876 plat map of Adams Township, quite busy in 1876. Abraham Adams, as I say, was the founder who settled it first and whose name it takes its from. This sits on the back of a bench in downtown Markleville. Ovid, New Columbus, and Little Pasquotank. Now I know you've all heard of Ovid. I know you've all heard of New Columbus. Raise your hand if you've heard of Little Pasquotank. Okay. You were here then.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I like to interject a little humor into it. So, my arrow points to its location in Adams Township. Abraham Adams and his family arrived there in 1823 and built a log cabin a short distance east of Ovid. My arrow points to the location of that Adams property. This is the New Columbus Ovid area. And that is the site, the ground where Mr. Adams had his cabin. Ovid or New Columbus, as it is also called, are names in need of explanation. According to the state of Indiana's official highway map, it's called Ovid. But on a recently issued official map of Madison County, it's called New Columbus. That's confusing. And if you ask residents of the Adams Township community, some will tell you Ovid, others will say New Columbus. I've run into that numerous places. People refer to it by both names, whatever personal preference they have. Adding to that confusion are road signs located at each end of the community on the New Columbus Road, formerly State Road 109, which read New Columbus or Ovid. Take your choice, I guess is what it's saying. Why the confusion? There is a simple explanation. And there are those road signs. I venture a guess that nowhere else in Indiana are you going to find a sign like that. It was Abraham Adams who in 1834 platted a town on the south side of Fall Creek and gave it the name New Columbus. His selection of the site, which rises some 30 feet above the low water mark in nearby Fall Creek, is today one of the more attractive ones in our county. When approaching from either north or south or from the east, one can appreciate the beauty of the setting of the little village. And here you see it. Looking straight down, north is up to the west, and to east and south is down. The name change took place in 1837 when a post office was established there. Previously, the residents ventured to Huntsville to post and receive their mail. With the new post office came the new name, Ovid. The name was selected by the United States Post Office because they alleged it was confusing for them due to the existence of the town of Columbus in Bartholomew County. Why the name Ovid was chosen was never recorded. In history, Ovid was the name known in the English-speaking world for the Roman poet Publius Ovidius Naso. Aren't we glad they didn't use the whole name? If the ancient poet's name was the source, no record was left to authenticate it. That is a 1901 map of the New Columbus, and you see the Ovid post office above it, and the town is probably not much bigger today than it was in 1901. The residents were not happy with the name and took legal action in 1840 to get it renamed New Columbus. They got nowhere, and it wasn't until the post office ceased operations there a century later that the citizens tried again. By then, the name Ovid had become ingrained into the local culture, and so the only resolution was to call it by both names, which is why the road signs read as they do. For a show of hands, I'm going to ask you your preference. Is Ovid your preference? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. New Columbus. Okay, see what I mean? Some scenes from Ovid and New Columbus. This is the Adams Township District School number 4, also known as Ovid, and that was first constructed in 1873. It's now private residence. Another shot of it. Obviously, it's been added to from its original size, but it's an 1873 one-room schoolhouse. The Masonic Lodge has their building down there. This was chartered in 1854. That's an old Masonic Lodge. That is not an 1854 building, though, by the way. East of town, on the south side of County Road 600 South, is a unique two-story house built into the side of a hill. Known locally as Sand House, reflecting its sandstone construction, it was originally the home of Adam Forney, who built, among others, the District Number 10 schoolhouse in Adams Township. Remember that. I'll show you that on down the road here. At one time, the house had running spring water in the basement. Early in its history, Ovid had the nickname Little Pasquotank. The name being derived from North Carolina's Pasquotank County, from which many of the early pioneers came to settle in this area. Many of them were old primitive Baptists and were referred to as Pee-wees. They built the primitive Baptist church at the top of a hill a mile west of Ovid on County Road 600 South and established the Pee-wee Cemetery there. Only the cemetery remains. That is a North Carolina map, and my arrow out here points to Pasquotank County, which is in the Tidewater area of North Carolina. But many of the original settlers in the Ovid, New Columbus area originated from that county. This arrow here points to where the church was located, and of course, today, the Pee-wee Cemetery. And there you see it. Mount Zion Lutheran Church and Cemetery. My arrow points to the cemetery. The church is immediately to the east of it on the south side of County Road 600. That is a cornerstone that's part of the building. It says it was erected on June 1st, 1861. You think about that, the Civil War had just broken out when this church was built. And I think it's one of the really scenic beauty spots in our county. The church building, I've got numerous photographs of it. I think it's just simply a beautiful cemetery, beautiful church. Been inside of it. The church congregation is no longer active, but the church itself is still available for people. Well, if there are burials in the cemetery, there are bereavement dinners in the church, and other functions go on there as well. The back part is obviously, if you've been in the building, you can tell that's an add-on to it. This would be the original building. And probably the original building did not have this. You probably entered directly into the church. Stained glass windows in it are gorgeous. Old Columbus. Raise your hand if you've heard of Old Columbus. Good. My arrow points to Old Columbus. There's a story here. A different group of Baptists called themselves German Baptists or Dunkers. They settled in an area referred to as Old Columbus at the intersection of County Road 500 South and the New Columbus Road. And I show you the intersection today. This is 500 South, this is the New Columbus Road, and this area was settled by the German Baptists, and they named it Old Columbus. It's believed they established the village, now listen to this, far enough north of Fall Creek in order to create a buffer zone of a mile or so from the North Carolina Baptists of New Columbus. Sounds like the Baptists didn't get along with each other very well. But that is the reasoning that I was able to dig out of some research that I did. They wanted that buffer zone between the primitive Baptists and the German Baptists. And so you see on my Google Earth shot, New Columbus, where the primitive Baptists were, and then a mile north is Old Columbus, where the Dunker Baptists, German Baptists were. Their place of worship, a brick structure, was erected in 1873 and still stands today, although it's a private residence. The area immediately east of the intersection had the dubious name of a departed canine, Dead Dog. The old Township District Schoolhouse number 3, attended by the German Baptist children, was known as the Dead Dog School. I'll have an explanation for that in just a moment. I know you're just dying to hear what that is. My Google Earth shot shows the school, and it shows you the German Baptist church. And this was all German Baptist settlement in the beginning. In 1866, a German Baptist church was organized and held meetings at various places in the vicinity of Ovid until 1873. That year, the congregation erected the building at a cost of $2,500. Boy, wouldn't you like to build a church today for $2,500? It is a 40 by 50 foot building with a basement, and that's a picture that I took from New Columbus Road. I can't tell you how many times I drove by there and looked over that and wondered about it. And finally, I can hear my mother on my shoulder now. Don't you go over there, Stevie. Stevie went over there. Curiosity got the best of me because I wanted to see what the rest of it looked like. Anybody ever seen that? First of all, raise your hand if that's familiar to you. Have you been behind it? Debbie's been in it, and you?
I think I have.
Okay. Well, I took my camera and I took some pictures. There's the front.
Okay.
You'd never guess that the back looks like that from looking at the front, would you? But that's the building. When I gave this presentation in June, when I was done that evening, a group of people came up to say different things to me, and one of them was a couple. And they said, "That's our house." I said, "We don't live there anymore, but that's our house. It still is. So if you'd like to see it sometime, let us know and we'll take you a tour of it. Emporia. Arrow points to Emporia. Emporia was a station on the southern extension of the Cincinnati, Wabash, and Michigan Railway, also known as the Big Four. It is situated 2 miles southeast of New Columbus. It was located upon the 1891 completion of the railroad to that point. And this is a map that we have of Emporia, dated 1901. And of course, this is currently State Road 36. And this is County Road 200 East, or the Range Line Road for some of you. And the grain elevator sits in here. And that's an aerial shot of what I've just shown you. One of the first industries to be established there was a sawmill of William and Edward Trueblood. A post office was established with William Trueblood as postmaster, but upon the introduction of the rural free delivery system, the office was discontinued. We got free mail delivery here in Madison County about 1903. Before that, delivered to your home. Before that, you had to go to a post office to pick up your mail. William Mosey opened the first general store after the town was laid out at what is today the northwest corner of US 36 and County Road 200 East. Silas Mosey built a stockyard for shipping farm animals on the railroad that was there. He named the town after the town of Emporia, Kansas. He had visited the stockyards there at one time in Emporia, Kansas, and was very impressed with them. And so when he came back, he attached the name Emporia to the town where he lived. This is the Adams Township District School number 6, also known as Walnut Grove and Emporia, and it was constructed in 1883. This is very unusual in Madison County schoolhouse construction because in 1883 we were building one-room, single-story schoolhouses. This is a 2-story, 4-room, 4 rooms, 2-story, indicating a pretty large population of children in that area to support a building that size. That's rare in our county that early on. The only other one that I can think of would have been in Fall Creek Township in Spring Valley. Originally they had a building just like this, built about the same time. Otherwise they were all just single-story, 1-room schoolhouses. Picture taken in 1910 of the children in front of the schoolhouse. That was grades 1 through 8. So you had 4 rooms, each room had 2 grades in it. That's how it operated. The entrance to Emporia on State Road US 36. The Carey Ponds. About 3/4 of a mile south of Old Columbus, along the New Columbus Road, is a site known to area residents as the Carey Ponds. In the 1830s, Fred and son Don Carey hand-dug 5 ponds in which to raise different varieties of fish to stock nearby streams for conservation purposes. My Google Earth shot shows this is all Carey property, but the ponds were right here, and there were 5 of them at one time. And I remember as a kid, my dad sold life insurance, and we would go out in the evening in the summertime where he would collect life insurance premiums from his customers. And invariably, he had some customers down in that part of the county, and we'd drive down there, and we'd go by those ponds. It just fascinated the heck out of me because they had wires strung across them with light bulbs, and those ponds were lighted at night. And it was a neat look to it. This is an old picture that I got from Ron Carey, one of the descendants. This would be, Ron believes, is his dad, and you can see the ponds are just being dug. There were 5 of them. And then that's a picture of his dad, dated 1926. They utilized a nearby free-flowing well to water their ponds. In 1957, the 5 ponds were combined into the single pond that is present there today. In the process of digging, a natural spring was hit, which now furnishes the water. And this is what you see today. It's the remnant of the original Carey ponds, which were a well-known feature in Adams Township, well-known feature. This is the New Columbus Road. And this is the shortest road in Madison County. No, it's 560, and it's a quarter of a mile long. Morris Gilmore. Typical in the early communities were mills, both flowering and saw, that appeared fulfilling the needs of the growing community. Beginning in 1829, a steady progression of mills flourished in the area. One remnant of that era has survived. East of Ovid and located in the valley created by Fall Creek is an old mill race that stretches for several hundred yards between the Gilmore Road and County Road 600 South. No doubt it was dug to carry water from the creek to power one of the mills located near the town. Today, what remains can be found behind the Morris Gilmore house. And the owner of the Morris Gilmore house was in here one day, 8, 9 years ago maybe. And at the time I was researching the area, and he learned of that, and he came in and he said, "Would you like to have a tour of my house?" And he told me he lived in the Morris Gilmore house, and I said, "Oh boy, would I?" So we made arrangements, and I went out there, and he took me all through the house. And they said, "Would you like to see the property?" And I said, "Yes." So we went out on the property, and we went down behind his house, and this, you can see, is the old mill race. And you see it here. And a mill race was simply a ditch hand dug to convey water from a source such as Fall Creek over to a mill to turn the wheel, and then it was rerouted back into the creek after it left the mill, and that was called the tail race. So you have mill race, tail race. This is the mill race for those. All of this, folks, would have been hand dug, all of it. The Gilmore house was built in 1838. Like Adams, Gilmore selected the site primarily because of the freshwater springs that were nearby. It was the first house built with bricks in Adams Township. Occupied continuously by members of the Gilmore family for many years, the house was eventually sold to the present owner, who is faithfully caring for the historic structure. He told me he bought it off of a Gilmore in 1970. So it was in the family from 1838 to 1970s when this gentleman bought it. He took me downstairs. Ladies, you're going to love this. We came in. This is the original house. That's obviously an add-on. Original house, 3 rooms. A bedroom, a parlor, a kitchen. That was the essentials. That's all they needed. Mr. and Mrs. Gilmore raised 8 children, and they all slept in the 1 bedroom. And what I also learned was that Mrs. Gilmore apparently was a pretty particular housekeeper. And she had a rule that her children were not to play in her parlor. So where do 8 children play when 1 room of 3 is eliminated? A bedroom and a kitchen is all that's left. Now, when the weather's nice, you shoo them outside, but in the wintertime. So wouldn't you like to know how she solved that problem? And I'd also like to know how well did the children obey the rule not to go in the parlor. Anyway, that was the upstairs, but then the downstairs had a unique feature to it. And here it is. Guys, do you see the floor joists? What are those? Logs. They're logs with the bark still on them. The owner of the house told me that dates the house because until 1838 in Indiana, or this area, this was typical construction. But then they learned that because of the moisture buildup inside, because of the bark trapping the moisture, They eliminated that and started building them by stripping the bark off. This bark is still there, thus eliminating rot. But he says this, according to him, this is typical Indiana construction, 1838 and before. How'd you like to lift one of those into place? If you're an electrician, what do you think of that wiring job? Another section of the basement. This one is propped up by a jack. Neat place. I was so pleased that he took me down there and showed me all this. Very nice gentleman. That is a stone that's out in the front yard, placed there in 1988, 150 years after the house was opened. And that is the house again. And you see in the front yard this sign, and it is been designated as an Indiana Historic Landmark. We have several of those in Madison County. Nearby is the Gilmore Cemetery, containing many members of the family, including Morris, as well as other notable persons in the Adams Township history. A reunion picture of the Gilmore family in front of the house. I don't know the date on it. We are friends with a couple by the name of Gilmore, and the Gilmores still get together. And we have a picture in our genealogy department of a photograph of a group from the Gilmore family. It's probably 8 or 10 years old now, on the front lawn, and they're Gilmores that came from all over the United States to come back and have a Gilmore reunion there. In Markleville is a memorial to the fallen members of the Adams Township. We'll come back to that. Alliance. My arrow points to Alliance. Officially, it was the Adams Township District School number 3, but everyone, beginning in the 1890s, knew it by its rather odd nickname, the Dead Dog School. While it shared the same unflattering name as another school in Boone Township, the origin of this name is totally different. Yes, in Madison County, we have 2 Dead Dog schools, named for entirely 2 different reasons. When I do Boone Township, I'll tell you that one. However, that was not its initial nickname. It was also known as the Dunkard School because of the nearby German Baptist, aka Dunkard population. The school appears on the Adams Township plat map dated 1876 in the same location as the school converted to a private residence does today on County Road 500 South, a short distance east of the New Columbus Road. If you're familiar with the Alliance Road or 500 South, you're probably familiar with that schoolhouse. What I was told by the man who lives there, that the front door for this school is around here. Because originally, the Alliance Road, which is out here, originally, years ago, the Alliance Road went behind that. And that was the front entrance to the school. It was constructed in 1877. Of course, it's been sided over, but it is of brick construction beneath the siding. There is an unsubstantiated information that states that at one time the area named Dead Dog encompassed everything along County Road 500 South from Old Columbus to Alliance, a distance of roughly 1/2 mile. The folklore origin of the Dead Dog name stems from a tragic incident involving a mother-to-be dog that was killed by a train at nearby Alliance. The arrows show you that distance between Old Columbus and Alliance. I want you to get that in your mind because of what you're now going to hear. Alliance was a station on the southern extension of the Cincinnati, Wabash, and Michigan Railway. It's situated about 2.5 miles northeast of Ovid and is one of 3 places in the township at which trains once stopped regularly. And here I show you the railroad running through Adams Township, Alliance being the first stop, Emporia the second, and Markleville the third. The original plat of Alliance that we have dated 1901, not the original plat, but it's a plat of Alliance in 1901 is a better way to say that. Alliance is another example of the United States Post Office stepping in and causing a name change. In 1854, Michael Stoller and his family moved to Madison County and purchased 200 acres of land in Adams Township. Upon his death, his son Henry inherited part of the land, and in 1890 he granted the CW&M Railroad a right-of-way for construction of the railroad. In 1891, Henry platted what became Alliance and granted the railroad additional property for the erection of a railroad station and depot. The property was located on the west side of the tracks and south of Main Street, which is County Road 500 South, and given the name Alliance Station. A rail siding went to, this is a quote, a rail siding went to a sawmill on the west side of the tracks, south of County Road 500 South, and a rail car was positioned on the siding to act as a station, as the station was never built. The first white building on the north side of County Road 500 South, east of the tracks, was the original store and post office. A cement slab from the mill is on the Markle property. That's a close quote. All this information was given to me in September of 2017 by Faith Burmeister and her sister Grace Markle. Grace lives where the sawmill was located. And I see some people nodding heads and talking. Raise your hand if you know Faith or Grace. Oh, wow. I better be careful what I say then. No, they're nice people, nice people. Faith has been in here a number of times to talk to me, she and her husband. Alliance on the left, and that first white building there is the general store, post office area. This is the Markle property, and that siding went off here, and a rail car was parked there, and that acted as the station and depot that was never built. The Alliance Post Office also began operating sometime in 1891 and was located across the railroad track on the north side of Main in a building that doubled for a store and post office operated by John Stoller. Since there was an Alliance Post Office already in existence in Marion County, the name was changed to Stoller. You see, the problem for the post office was there were no zip codes then. Zip codes have eliminated all of this confusion. But before zip codes, where your post office was had to have a name unique to where you were. Otherwise, how would the mail ever get to you? And even today, we're not sure it all gets to us, right? It began operating under that name on the 22nd day of July in 1891 and continued until the 31st of January, 1894. Like the Emporia office, it probably was closed when the rural free mail delivery came about. Before the railroad decided on the route which took it through Alliance, there was speculation that it would pass through Old Columbus, bringing with it a new level of prosperity. If you had a railroad built through an area, that was like having interstate built to an area today. That was immediate prosperity because of all the business that would pop up alongside of it and all the commerce that it would bring to the area. So Old Columbus was anxiously awaiting the railroad's decision as to where they were going to locate it, hoping that it would come through Old Columbus. The railroad would also give the German Baptist-based community a decided advantage over the primitive Baptists at New Columbus. I suppose they were still knocking heads. But the project to route the railroad directly through Old Columbus never got off the ground. When the railroad chose the route to Alliance, the Old Columbus area failed to prosper and slowly withered away. As no known explanation exists for the origin of the name Alliance, it may have involved a reconciliation of sorts between the residents of Old Columbus and Alliance. With the coming of the railroad, perhaps the name Alliance was conceived to reflect the coming together of the two neighbors. That's my assessment. I take ownership for that completely. I have no other explanation for it, but it seems logical to me. If that was the plan, it was short-lived, as only Alliance remains today. And here you see the area that I'm talking about, Old Columbus, is now gone. Lost Woods. Lost Woods, my arrow points to its location up in the northeast corner of Adams Township. If you travel far enough east on County Road 500 South, the road comes to a heavily wooded area at the intersection with County Road 450 East. This area, for obvious reasons, has been known as Lost Woods. Now, I have to stop here. The last time I did this presentation in June, there was a lady that came up afterwards, and she says, I have another explanation for the name Lost Woods. I said, what is it? Well, she said, we lived out there as a kid, and we used to sit on the front porch and watch all the people driving around who seemed lost. Still do. Still do, there we go. Seemed lost as to what they were looking for, where they were trying to go. So you now have that explanation. That's not in here, that's extra. That's extra. That's the intersection of 450 East, 500 South, and that is the infamous Lost Woods area. It also extends beyond this intersection here as well. And you can see my arrow points to the Lost Woods, and it also points to this area over here, which is pretty heavily wooded. Probably at one time that was all woods, and hence the name. Another explanation I have, Markaville grads, raise your hand. Oh, look at you. Well, see, I was told this by a pretty legitimate source, who shall remain unnamed, that the high school boys from Markaville High School, when they were dating a girl, would like to drive out there and pretend like they were lost. Any of you guys want to own up to that? Were any of you girls ever lost in the Lost Woods? Boy, there are no hands going up on either of those questions. Okay. A little bit closer look at it. Just east of this intersection and nestled into the wooded area on the north side of County Road 500 South is a brick residence. At one time, it was the Adams Township District School Number 1, known as Lost Woods, also known as Possum Glory, undoubtedly for the heavily wooded area that provided welcome shelter to all sorts of critters, including possum, I suppose. That's the schoolhouse, converted into a residence. And on the right is a picture dated, says before 1928, showing you what the schoolhouse looked like. Those schoolhouses in Adams Township would have been in operation as one-room schoolhouses until right up close to 1929. In 1929, Adams Township consolidated, as did a number of the townships in Madison County, did away with the one-room schoolhouses. They were inefficient. The schoolhouse number 1 was constructed in 1886. That's typical in Madison County. In the 1830s and 40s, our schoolhouses were built of logs. In the 1850s and 60s and early 70s, they were built of frame. And about mid-1870s on, they were built of brick. Polywalk. Polywalk, as you can see, is in the lower left-hand corner of Adams Township. Polywalk was the 1872 name given to a thickly settled locality in the southwest corner of Adams Township on account of the roads and walks being constructed of poles. These early day corduroy roads, as they were called, were necessary in many portions of the county, but with the draining of the county and the building of the pikes, they disappeared. That was always a problem in the flat areas in our county for a long time. Like Lafayette Township is atypical of the problems they had with drainage. It was most of the ground in Lafayette Township was not tillable because it would not drain. And finally, when they tiled those fields, they drained them, then the farmers could use them. Adams Township in the southwestern corner had the same problem. It was wet all the time. And so the roads were corduroyed. They were logs laid side by side so that people and wagons could move across them and get through those swampy areas. And they called those polywalks. This particular locality was noted for its many social gatherings, especially dances. And my Google Earth shot shows that area today. This is the Polywalk area, and that's the old Polywalk School, or Buttonwood, as it was also known. Today, the man who lives across the road from this, who owns it, and I'm told he has his workshop inside of it. And you might notice the difference in the color of the brick. We had a pretty good storm in that area a number of years ago, and it blew off, damaged the top portion of it. So they rebuilt it, but of course they couldn't match the brick, so that's what you get. Another picture of it. Buttonwood Polywalk, constructed in 1889, and now pay attention to this. You see the name here, Adam Forney, trustee. You remember earlier the sandstone house east of Ovid? He was the trustee that lived in that house. And he was the trustee at the time that that schoolhouse was built. Big Lick. My arrow points to Big Lick. This is Markleville. Big Lick is south of Markleville. Big Lick is a well-known hunting ground in the early settlement of the county. It's located on the southeast corner of Adams Township at the source of Lick Creek. It was a favorite Native American hunting ground. Deer and other animals would come to this spot in great numbers to lick the ground, which was heavily impregnated with salt. The hunter had little difficulty in supplying his family with an abundance of meat. This is one of the earliest, not one of, it is the earliest known work remnants of any existence in Madison County, predates Mounds Park considerably. The Big Lick area, we believe, was formed around the year 9600 BC. 9600 BC, when the last glacier came through this area and made the deposits of rich mineral, stone, and gravel in this area. And I'll show you a picture of it. It is here, and it is here. This area has been drained by the farmers now, but this area, its appearance, I would guess, probably resembles its appearance from the prehistoric times. Interestingly, the water would seep from the ground, and it would come up through about a 30-foot layer of very mineral-rich deposits of stone and gravel. And as the water surfaced, it was saturated with those minerals. God gave animals the good sense to know what they should eat and drink. Unlike humans that don't have that sense, animals do have that sense. And so they would come there to drink of that water because of the life-giving minerals that it gave to them. Well, they came in droves. And the prehistoric Indians who lived here seized upon that opportunity and would just lie and wait and then kill them for meat, fur, and what have you. Then when the tribes who we do know their names, the Delaware, the Miami, the Seneca, the others that were in this area, came there, they did the same thing. And then when the first settlers came, they did the same thing. They repeated it. We know not from this area, but from an area north of here in Anderson Township. If you know where the South Drive-In used to be in Anderson along State Road 67, that was a bog. And there was a farm there. And in the 1860s, there were mastodon bones taken out of that ground there. That's what it looks like today. The water that you see there still seeps from the ground. It's been ditched by the farmer so he can cultivate the field. It flows in a northward direction beneath the road and up, and it joins Lick Creek. And where it joins Lick Creek, here, where it joins it, if you walk through the woods and walk down to where it joins it, the stones and all the ground around there are all yellow from the high sulfur content that's in the water. So what the glaciers did almost 10,000 years ago, we still see evidence of that in the discoloration of the water today. Markleville. Arrow points to Markleville. I don't need to know that. Everybody knows where Markleville is, right? Aerial shot of it. Markleville was laid out in 1852 by John Markle, from whom it derived its name. When the CW&M Railroad was completed through the town in 1890, Markleville became a station of considerable importance for the southern part of the county. By 1910, the population had increased to 225, and some of the citizens began to advocate for the incorporation of the town. 2 years passed before anything definite was done, but on August 10th, 1912, a petition to incorporate the town of Markleville, signed by more than 1/3 of resident qualified voters, was presented to the Board of County Commissioners. An election was ordered for August 27, 1912, with 67 votes cast, 52 in favor and 15 opposed. That's roughly, what, a third, isn't it, of those who were against it. Well, I can tell you this, these were all men. These were all men. Women didn't have the right to vote in 1912. So those are all male votes, and they are adult males. They're not children. So that's adult male population in Markleville, 67, and I would imagine that most of the folks voted. The board ordered and ordained that the said town is legally and lawfully incorporated under and by the name Markleville. Markleville scenes. I love the reference to city limit. I would have said Markleville town limit, I think, but that's semantics. The Hardy Building. When I was taking this picture, the guy painting the building there, he's over there waving at me. Bethel School. Adams Township District School number 2, aka Bethel, was constructed in 1901 and is, and I need to change is to was, located on the northwest corner of County Road 300 East and 500 South. It's just vacant property now. I don't know what the plans are for it. I suppose it became unsafe. Homesteads. Corey Homestead, Mawsey Homestead. These are all Adams Township homesteads. Adams Township honors its past. I think that's a really poignant memorial that the Adams Township has erected for its fallen. I believe it's always decorated too, is it not? That's a fitting tribute. Bicentennial year, it says that this was the site of John Markle's home. On State Road 38 is this historical marker. It says in 1824, 9 Indians were murdered by white men near this spot. The men were tried, found guilty, and hanged. It was the first execution of white men for killing Indians. There's an add footnote to that. Under the United States Constitution. There is an incident that occurred in New England before the Constitution was signed, but since the Constitution was signed, this is the first time that it happened. This is a historical map that's in our possession of Adams Township, and it says that, tells the story. This was all signed, sealed, and delivered during the county's sesquicentennial to actually authenticate the spot where the massacre occurred. You see Markleville here today. This is 800 South, and the location of the massacre was right here. Now I'll take you there as close as I can get you. That's Deer Lick Creek. The massacre actually occurred on Deer Lick Creek. The execution and trial occurred on Fall Creek. My arrow points to the location of the site where the massacre occurred today. The point of the arrow rests exactly on that spot as closely as I could determine it based upon talking to the family members who now own that ground and are descendants of her. The arrow points to an area that was a swamp until it was drained by Alonzo Wilkinson in the early 1900s to make the land tillable. Note the dark area where the arrow is pointed. This area is low and wet even today, but can be farmed according to the people who own the ground. This is the site of the 1824 Indian Massacre as told by Catherine Adams, who, at the age of 13, saw the squaws and Indian children after they were murdered. So that authenticates the site. Catherine Adams was the great-grandmother of Ruth Kiesling Dane, and that's whose name you saw on the document that we secured in 1973. The arrow again points to that site here, and you can see the surrounding markings to give you some idea. Here's the Markville North Christian Church, and we were just talking to somebody about that just a moment ago. So the family has told me it was okay to reveal this. In the beginning, they told me not to reveal it, so I didn't. But it wasn't until I put this together I got permission to reveal the location with this caveat. Don't go. You can look at it from the road, but please stay off the ground. The pioneer cemeteries is what I'm going to conclude with today, because within Adams Township are a number of pioneer cemeteries. And these are the people that settled the township, first settled there, and I thought you would be interested in seeing their names, that is the cemetery names, where they're located, and in each case I looked up the earliest known date of death in each cemetery to give you some idea of how old some of these are. The purpose of the Madison County Cemetery Commission is to restore and preserve the early cemeteries in Madison County. The following photographs and descriptions of the known pioneer cemeteries in Adams Township are from the website Pioneer Cemeteries and Their Stories, Madison County, Indiana. This website was produced and written by Melody Hall for the Cemetery Commission, of which she is a member, and it's a grateful appreciation that I acknowledge her efforts in providing the information that now follows. The Clap Tucker Cemetery, I won't read the locations, you can see where it is. But the earliest known date of death in there is April 20th, 1837. Collier Cemetery, its location, June 9th, 1835. And way back here is the Evans Cemetery. Earliest known date of death is April 13th, 1840. The Fleming, Kissling, and Old Kiesling Cemetery. Earliest known date of death there is April the 12th, 1854. The Gilmore Cemetery. Earliest known date of death there, December 6th, 1822. That's before we were a county. McAllister Walker Cemetery. Oldest known date of death there is April 5th, 1836. The Ovid Lutheran Mount Zion Cemetery. Oldest known date of death there is 1860. The Pee Wee, really known as the Prince of Peace Cemetery, but it has picked up the name Pee Wee. Its oldest known date of death is July 2nd, 1835. The J. Pendleton, which is a family plot cemetery, February 11th, 1827 is the oldest known date of death. We have one destroyed, the Star Fessler, no longer in existence. The Williams, same story. And with that, today's presentation comes to an end.